Hi, my name is Alejandra Jaramillo. Did you think Hispanic? Did you think Latina? Did you know I'm asking two different questions? Because Hispanic and Latino don't exactly mean the same thing. You are listening to A Case of Identity, What Box Am I? A podcast on the mass confusion of the identitarian labels Hispanic and Latino, Latina, how it affects and to whom.
Josh Rowan, 21, New York.
Do you know the difference between a Latino and a Hispanic?
Yes.
What is the difference?
One is from South America and one is from Europe.
This misunderstanding goes further and deeper than of those removed from this community. What is your name?
My name is Maria Luisa Peralta.
Where are you originally from?
San Jose, Costa Rica. I think I'm a Latina.
Have you ever been considered Hispanic?
Yes. I don't know the difference. I think they mean the same thing.
Can you give it a try?
I think Latina is has more negative connotation from what I understand. I personally related to a more lower class. I know that's wrong.
So the difference is that one has to do with the language you speak and the other has to do with the geography.
The term Hispanic has become somewhat contentious over the last 30 years.
Hispanist, author, and cultural studies scholar Raul Rubio.
The term Hispanic has a wide range of uses, from identitarian or self-identifying ones to more population segment-oriented ones. It was utilized in order to describe, study, profile, or target groups based on their ethnicity. Its use has been mostly observed in reports or studies that intended to describe the Hispanic market in advertising, or the Hispanic electoral bloc, or even the Hispanic label.
We talked to Senator Marco Rubio earlier this morning.
Here's what people have to remember, because with all this hyperbole and people getting hyperventilated about the Hispanic vote, number one is there is no such thing as a monolithic Hispanic vote. It is very much determined by where you live, how long you've been here, those sorts of things.
Over the last 20 years, however,
continues Raul,
we've seen a decrease in the use of Hispanic and more appropriate uses of Latina, Latino, market, etc. Latin Americans living in the United States and U.S.-born individuals of Latin American or Spanish heritage have adopted and embraced the term Latina or Latino.
Some, like Salome Coronel, a foreign student living in New York, points out why you should know the difference.
It's if a person from England, a person from Canada, and a person from the US go back home.
For Salome, home is Quito, Ecuador.
And everyone back home call all of them gringos. No, they all come from different places, but all of them speak English in different accents. I'm pretty sure the Brits would be pissed. Or it's like when people call all Asian Chinese, but at least they do know the difference. With us, no one knows the difference, and a lot of us just call us Mexicans.
Political scientist Angelo Falcon, the president of the National Institute of Latino Policy, explains.
And Latino and Hispanic, these terms are basically terms that have been created in the United States. Like some people say, no one comes from a country called Latinidad company or anything like that. The country. Hispanic, for example, is a term that some people say was really largely created by the federal government when they were developing the census question on trying to count. And the same thing with the word Latino. So the census defines Latino or Hispanic as Spanish-speaking persons. And that would include Spain, right? But it doesn't include Brazil. However, there are some Brazilians who do consider themselves Latino or Hispanic. Then there's the other issue of indigenous people, right, in Latin America and Colombia, different people who don't even speak Spanish, but they're natives to those countries. So those are complications of having you being defined from outside of your community and outside of your experience by, let's say, the U.S. federal government, and that's what's going on. We find that in surveys that we've seen, opinion polls and surveys that have done of Latino opinion over time, that people who are Latino or Hispanic tend to prefer to identify themselves as by their national origin, by whether the Mexican, Puerto Rican, rather than by the broader terms of Latino or Hispanic.
A perfect example, Laura Huitrao. She has almost 4 years living in New York, and when I asked what term she used to self-identify, this is what she said.
What do you mean, Colombian?
Here in the United States, what would you be classified as?
So you're talking about like race or ethnicity?
Yeah.
I would still say like I'm from Colombia, like I'm Colombian. But if you're telling me to categorize myself, I would say Latina.
And why would you say you identify yourself as a Latina?
Because I would consider myself white my whole life. And here, when you fill up a paper in the United States, you always have like different options. And white and Latino are always different options. So I guess if I'm Latina, I can't be white. So I'm Latina.
For immigrants and people who are not native to the United States, filling out a census form, or any form for that matter, is one of the first experiences they have with a label and lack of identification.
The first time that I had to self-identify myself, I was very confused because they were naming me something that I would never name myself.
Non-immigrants like Natalie Carbonell, born in South Florida from Cuban parents, also feel discomfort filling out these types of forms.
The one thing that I've noticed is super prominent, like I've applied to 1,000 jobs. Like they make it like big, bold letters. They give you a huge thing like description of like what it is that they need to fulfill their diversity and whatnot. At the end, it always says like, I prefer not to disclose. And to me, it's like, whether or not you disclose is up to you. But like, if it gives me a better opportunity, I'm sitting here like, why would it?
Yeah.
¿Me entiendes? And it's like, it's so prominent in the actual like application that it sort of bothered me.
And there is a reason why some prefer not to disclose. Here again is Angelo Falcon explaining his opinion.
The lack of Latino leadership in ourselves defining, what to call ourselves. For example, there was a time in the 80s, 1980s, and I could tell you about this stuff because I'm an old guy. In 1980s, some people used to make fun of the term Hispanic. Then there was a joke about who wants to be anybody's panic, right? I don't want to be Hispanic. Who's panic? That was a joke.
Funny or not, stereotypes and negative connotations are a large reason why such a big group of people don't identify with these terms.
Hispanic, some people saw it as Puerto Ricans trying to see if they could pass almost for white. They didn't want to be identified as Puerto Ricans because Puerto Ricans were identified as people that were on welfare and poor people and, gang members.
Here's David Kraker from the Census government with his point of view.
I don't think the Census Bureau, first of all, some of those questions that the Census Bureau has on there, like Hispanic or Latino, that's not their own creation. So I'm not saying in this instance it is or it isn't, but I do know that they get a lot of political pressure by groups to put a word on there. So I think there might be, they're just different types of coalitions, and they come forward and they say, we don't want you to use this word this time, or we want you to include this word this time. That does happen. The Census Bureau doesn't just, pull out of its hat, we want this word. It's usually, not usually, but sometimes it's a group or a coalition that comes forward and they force it. And it happens. And I'm sure that's how that Hispanic Latino thing came about. I don't think it was the Census Bureau purely itself. Probably they were part of that. But I think there were these other groups that came forward and did something and said they wanted that on there. The questions for the decennial census, there are not many questions for that, but the questions, as far as I know, have changed little by little over 10 years. For example, the race or Hispanic, the Hispanic question. So I think all it is language that's trying to keep up with the thoughts of today's society. So, for example, people used to call themselves Negroes, and then they moved from that word to being called Black, and then from Black to African American. So often on a census, we will have all three words there because we're not quite sure how people want to identify themselves, but it will be there. We are progressing to make questions more postmodern so that people can be one thing and another. So people do have the option of saying, I am two races, or I am two ethnicities, or this is my second ancestry. And yes, we did that less in the past. It was more narrowed in the past. And now we realize that's not really how society is. Well, I can identify with what you say, just because I remember I used to have a neighbor who was Cuban, and she did not identify herself as Hispanic. She would put white. Until that moment, and she explained that to me, I had no idea that Hispanic was a code word for some people for mixed race, which I had no idea.
But it's not a race.
No, but some people view it as race.
So, for example, a person coming from Spain is not a Latino. They're just Hispanic.
They're not? Oh.
They're
but
Hispanic.
I think people from Spain won't put white.
An NYU student originally from Spain identifies himself as...
I consider myself to be first and foremost Hispanic, secondly European, and thirdly Spanish. I think there's a lot of confusion in this country. Many people are even surprised that I am a white European who can speak Spanish. Many times I've been asked, what country or where I was from. I've answered Spain, and I've received a question as an answer. They've asked me, what country in Spain are you from? So there is widespread confusion at a variety of levels in terms of ethnicity, race, language, culture, and even geography, sadly. It is simply objectively, factually wrong to qualify me as Mexican or a Latino. I feel profoundly Hispanic. I feel that the Hispanic peoples, in this side of the Atlantic, are my brethren and my cultural cousins. But it is simply wrong to qualify me as Latino or a Mexican. And I feel deeply sorry for all of those insulted by such measures of ignorance.
And Europeans within the Hispanic community are not the only ones affected by the mass confusion.
We're talking about 58 million Latinos or Hispanics in this country, coming from different places. You have mostly Mexicans, right? But even in the Mexican experience, you got Mexican Americans been here for hundreds of years. You have Mexican immigrants who just got here the other day. A lot of people were not documented. You have in the Puerto Ricans that come here already as U.S. citizens, right, from Puerto Rico, that come here very different from that experience of the other Latinos. You have the Cubans who came here as refugees from Cuba and have a special status. So you come in, from different ways into American society, and so we wind up defining our experiences in different ways. So the idea is this big experiment of trying to come up with this kind of common identity between these different groups and stuff. And that's why right now it's something that's still in the process of occurring and changing, because we have so many Latinos coming in and leaving back and forth. It's not, a steady kind of migration. And so what happens is that all you're seeing is a reflection of that fluidity within the community. And that's important to kind of understand. The terms have a certain use that's positive, and sometimes they get in the way because sometimes they obscure the reality. So that, for example, we talk about the New York City Department of Education, right? When they talk about the dropout rate in the school system, the high school dropout rate. Yeah. And they talk about the Latino dropout rate is 40%. You go, Well, how are Puerto Ricans different in terms of versus, let's say, Colombians who just got here in terms of the school system? If you mix the two groups together, say Puerto Ricans who've been here a longer time, maybe they speak English more, and then you mix it together and you say, well, the Latino dropout rate is X, 30%. Doesn't mean anything, because it may be much, much higher for the Mexicans than for the Puerto Ricans. And so you all of a sudden you're not creating information that's useful to either of the two groups.
Brunilda Sanchez, ironically from the census, prefers one term over the other solely based on her experiences.
Yo prefiero personal, para mí es latina, yo prefiero latino. Entonces, pero cuando yo trabajo a través del censo, cuando tenía que hablar sobre el grupo de esta población, de los hispanos latinos, pues de inmediato me dijeron, no, tú tienes que decir Hispanic. Así que siempre si me refería a la población en escritos o presentaciones, o pues siempre yo decía, pero si yo estoy hablando para mí, no del trabajo, yo digo, I'm latina.
Y te puedo preguntar por qué, ¿por qué prefieres ser llamada latina?
Porque hispano no me gusta de la connotación de los españoles.
Okay.
Yo prefiero ser que yo soy de América, like Latina, like South America, Latin America.
Yeah.
The president of the National Hispanic Media Coalition, Alex Noales, is recognized for defending the Latino community and is very respected. His solution is an interesting one.
I prefer a third one that is an American Latino. Because if you say Latino, that's all of Central and South America. So it doesn't help us. But if you say American Latino, it places that Latino inside of the U.S., either as a resident, as a plan at birth, or whatever the case may be. Latino is just very broad. Hispano, the same thing, very broad. Language kind of defines us because through language, we understand culture. Language kind of opens the door to whatever you may be. As long as you identify with the culture, that's the main thing.
You just listened to A Case of Identity with Boxamai, a podcast on the mass confusion of the identitarian labels, Hispanic and Latino, how it affects and to whom. Thank you for listening. Alejandra Jaramillo.